Hello, my lovelies. Welcome back to the podcast. I'm Jenna, your host. On today's episode, we are still in our folklore series. We're going to cover ghosts. Have you seen one? I go ghost hunting. I'm a paranormal investigator on top of being a psychic, on top of being a medium, tarot reader, author, yada yada. Okay? So in a few instances in my life, I have physically seen a full-bodied apparition. If you don't know what a full-bodied apparition is, it's a ghost that you can see the majority of their form, their body, or what they may have looked like in their previous lifetime. So to start out this episode, I want to cover a few of my real life paranormal encounters that I've had with ghosts or otherworld entities. So the very first one that I want to talk about happened when I was a teenager. I was visiting my dad in the middle of July. It was very, very hot in Middle Tennessee. We didn't have air conditioning. We just had some big box fans that were running. And it was a small cabin out kind of in the woods off of a 2-lane little country road. And so one night I'm sleeping on the fold-out couch. And so if I can paint a picture for you of what this cabin looked like, it was a one-room cabin. It had one bedroom, one bathroom, a kitchen, and a living room. And that was the entire cabin. So on my first trip out to go visit my dad for the summer, I had been there maybe a week, I want to say. I hadn't been there very long. And prior to me going out there, I remember my dad and I having conversations about his cabin he thought was haunted. And I kind of brushed it off being a teenager. I'm like, yeah, whatever, you're just trying to scare me. I don't believe in that shit, okay, Dad? So like most teenagers, it's in one ear and out the other, right? And that's really kind of how it went down. So as I'm sleeping in the fold-out bed, it faced the front door of the cabin. And so since it's the middle of July, we live out in the middle of nowhere. This was clear back in the 90s. So, we didn't worry about people just coming into your house in the middle of the night. So the screen door was open. It had a little hook and eye latch. You've seen those maybe way back when. And that was all that was holding the door shut. So middle of the night, I'm sound asleep. I'm kind of awoken. I hear what I feel like is some sort of noise. And I kind of sleepily open my eyes. And as I open my eyes, I see a figure of what looked like a man standing at the door, outside the door. So I'm kind of trying to put two and two together, like, who the heck is that? And I can very clearly see what looks like human features. I literally thought it was a man standing outside the door. Well, the man, I could see enough of what he looked like. He looked like my dad's best friend at the time. His name was Randy Snow. And Randy was a very sweet man, but he was a very big character. He had a larger than life personality, but I loved Randy to pieces. He was a lot of fun. And so as I'm trying to kind of get my bearings and look and see, I'm thinking to myself, what in the world would Randy be doing here in the middle of the night? And so I no more than get that thought out of my mind before this person is inside the room with me. Now keep in mind that the door never opened. The door never was unlocked. The door was literally closed the entire time. So in the time it took me to have this conversation in my brain and to think those thoughts, this entity, this person, what I thought was a person, was in the room with me and standing literally next to my side of the bed that I was sleeping on and looking at me. Let that sink in for just a minute. The door never opened, but this person, or what I perceived to be a person in that moment, was in the room with me and standing next to my bed. He did not walk, he floated, okay? You couldn't hear any sort of movement. You didn't hear him walk. He literally glided through the room, okay? So that's when I started to kind of think, maybe this isn't a human. In that moment, I'm paralyzed with fear. I couldn't scream. I couldn't move. I was literally paralyzed. My eyes were wide open. I could hear and feel everything, but I had no idea in that moment what was actually happening. So this man that I could see, I could describe him to you still to this day. He had dark hair. You could see his face clearly. He looked exactly like his son, and I didn't know at the time until after this whole event unfolded who I was really dealing with. So I thought that it was Randy at first, and this person, we're going to say he was a person at that point, he had this silvery blue hue that wrapped all the way around him, almost like a little outline all the way around him. So he didn't speak to me, but he looked directly at me and he smiled. And then he turned and he walked towards the dining room table, which was in the same room as me, one step into the kitchen and vanished into thin air. So after the fact, after he had left the room, I could let out a scream, and I screamed for my dad, who was literally about 5 feet from me in his bedroom. And he woke up and he scrambled and he said, "What's going on out there?" And I said, "Dad, there's a man in the house. I don't know who it is." And he was just staring at me. And so my dad gets up and he grabs his pistol and he starts looking everywhere. We didn't hear a car pull up. Mind you, we're in the middle of the country. Okay, so you can't usually just walk to places. There are miles and miles separation in between. So there was no car in the driveway. We couldn't find a person in the tiny cabin. We looked everywhere. We looked outside. Nothing. It's as if he vanished into thin air. So my dad kind of sits there for a second and he says, "What did this guy look like?" And I said, "Dad, I thought it was Randy. I really did. He looked just like him." And he said, "Well, what happened?" So I recount it. I said, "He was standing at the door. I woke up. I heard a noise. And the guy stood there at the door for a second. I wondered what was going on. And then all of a sudden he was inside the room with me. He was standing next to my side of the bed and he looked at me and he smiled. And then he walked towards the dining room table into the kitchen and he was gone. And then I could yell for you." I said, "Dad, I couldn't move. I couldn't do anything. I couldn't move my arms and legs. I couldn't scream, nothing. I was paralyzed." And he was like, "Okay." And he said, "Well, none of the doors have been messed with. Everything's just how we left it before we went to sleep. I don't know what the heck happened." So the next day we had to go move cows because it was a working ranch that he lived on. Yes, your girl has hauled hay. Yes, your girl has mucked stalls. Yes, your girl has fed cows and other livestock. I have done those things. So we went to go move these cows to a different pasture for them to graze on. So I was helping with that. And we meet up with Randy, his best friend, that morning. And he pulls me aside and he says, "You need to tell Randy what you saw last night." I was like, "No, we're not doing that. No, we don't need to look any crazier than we already are." And he said, "He's not going to think you're crazy. Will you just tell him what happened?" So I told him, and he lets out a chuckle and he says, "Well, I'll tell you what, it was probably my dad. His dad had passed away several years before. The cabin was built by George, his dad, many years before." There's so much backstory to this. I will cover it. So the cabin sat on family land. The family owned 2,000 acres of land. They had been there for many, many years. The main house, or the big house, is a mansion that sits on the biggest part of the lot. And once upon a time, it was a fully operational ranch. I believe they had several thousand head of cattle. They may have grown crops too. I can't quite remember. It's been many years. But they did have slaves on the property at one time, and the slave quarters are still there on the property. The house is now on the Historical Society of Rutherford County in Tennessee, if you would like to look it up. So that house is still there. The family had sold off several acres over the years, but the plot when my dad had lived there still was about 2,000 acres of land. So the cabin was on part of the land, and it was George Snow's cabin. He had built it by hand. It was a log cabin. So when he dedicated the cabin, he put in like a little carving in one of the logs that said the day that it was completed. It was completed quite literally 7 days prior to my dad ever being born. My dad did not know these people up at that point. So George, that was his little hideaway. That was his little happy place. And according to his son, Randy, he spent all of his time there that he didn't have to be like at work or at home with his family. That was his little happy place. And so he was always there. And so rumor has it that even when he passed away, his essence, his spirit, his ghost was still there checking on the property because it was his. He built it with his own two hands. Fast forward several years in the future, my dad happened to be looking for a new place. He was friends with Randy, and Randy said, why don't you move into the cabin and, you know, you're going to help us work on the ranch. So my dad was like a ranch hand doing cowboy stuff, which he still does to this day. And so he was there for many, many years. I can't remember. I want to say close to like probably 15 years he was there. So my dad is a very spiritual person, and I remember him telling me that he really did think that the cabin was haunted, that when he moved in there, odd things would happen and things that he couldn't really just explain away. And one of those was that he used to sleep with his pistol under his pillow just in case, right? Because he was out there in the middle of nowhere. And that things would be moved, or he'd hear weird sounds, or he had a rocking chair by the fireplace that would just start to sway out of nowhere. So that was one of the things that he told me before I ever got there. Hey, I'm pretty sure the cabin is haunted. But I didn't believe him. I also didn't know as a teenager that I was a medium. I would have very psychic dreams that would typically happen, but I didn't realize that I was channeling when I was channeling. I didn't know how I did all those things until I was about 40 years old when I figured out how to actually control those things. So lots of weird things. So to the topic of the cabin, every time I would go home and visit my dad, something odd would happen, okay? And so George made his presence very clear to me. To my knowledge, I'm the only one who's ever seen him fully manifest his entire body, the full-bodied apparition. To this day, I don't think anybody else has ever seen him do that besides me. So that was pretty significant. So when I told Randy what had happened the night before, he chuckled at me and he said, well, my dad would never hurt you. He was a big family man. He loved people, and he was a bit of a notorious ladies' man back in his day, so he probably just wanted to come check you out in your underwear and catch a little glimpse. I think I gave him a few choice words, probably cursed at him a little bit, slugged him in the arm and said, that's not fucking funny, Randy. That was scary. And he said, I promised he would never hurt you, but that was his favorite place to be. And so he would absolutely come visit it. I guarantee you he's still around. So that was my first experience. I was a little terrified to be there alone after that experience because I just didn't know what to expect. But being reassured by his son that he wouldn't do anything to hurt me, I calmed down a little bit. So I would say a few weeks had passed by. I was there for the majority of the summer. Nothing super noteworthy happened. We did see the rocking chair kind of start swaying on its own. Let's see, like light bulbs bursting out. So in the future, I was there with my two boys. I only had two at the time, and my now ex-husband. We were married at the time. And we were there to visit my dad for roughly a week or two. I can't remember how long exactly we were there. So I had told my husband at the time, I said, the last time I was here, I saw George. Like, he physically came and entered the room and everything. And I said, so I don't think that's going to happen, but I would be curious if he shows up because I'm here. So it was, I want to say it was like February or March when we went. Still chilly, still a little cold. So on one end of the cabin, there was a log burning fireplace, and on the other end, we had a wood burning stove, and that was how we heated the cabin. So my dad said, hey, you know, it's a little chilly in here. I don't want the kids to get you cold, so I'm going to add some more wood to the fireplace. Could you throw a few logs into the wood burning stove over there for me? I was like, yeah, sure. So as I go over there, I happened to bring up George. I said, you know, the last time I was here, he came and showed up. I wonder if he's going to make his presence known now that I brought my family to his cabin. I no more than got that sentence out. There was a piece of what's called horse tack that you would use to like put their reins or their, I can't remember why I can't think of the word right now, but they put like a bit in their mouth, and then there's straps that go to their harness that you would hold on to help know which way to turn. And so the bit goes in their mouth, and it helps them realize which direction you want to turn a horse. So if you don't know anything about equestrianism and horses, that's how that works. So there was a piece of that up in the cabin that was on a hook, and it was just hanging there. It had like a little circular piece and then a hook at the top, and it was hanging on a nail. So I hadn't touched anything yet. I literally had walked over there. I was standing there getting ready to put a log in, and I no more than got that sentence out, and it flipped down and it started swaying like this. I stopped everything I was doing and I said, "Can you guys see this, or am I fucking losing my mind?" And they said, "No, we see it. What the heck is going on?" So there was that. So George was absolutely communicating that he heard us, he knew we were there, and yes, he was making his presence known. So later that day, another one of my dad's friends, Kenny, had come by, and they were gonna smoke some cigars, but since the babies were there, so as we are there and we see all these crazy things start to happen, that evening, my dad's friend was gonna smoke a cigar, and I said, "Since the kids are here, would you guys mind just taking that outside? I don't want them breathing all that yucky smoke." So they said, "Oh, sure, no problem. We'll just go take it out back." So they're outside. My dad says, "Hey, could you turn on the porch light? It's getting dark out here." I said, "Yeah." So I go and I flip on the switch, and he said, "You know, I've lived here 8 or 10 years. I don't think I've ever replaced that light bulb." He no more than says that, and the light bulb burns out. Pretty weird stuff. So he was like, "That's kind of strange." And I said, "Yeah, that is very strange." So he goes, he grabs another light bulb, he puts it in, done deal. So I want to say it had been a few days after that. One of my kids, my second oldest at the time, he was maybe 8 or 9 months old, I think, that trip. And he was in a little baby walker, and he was just cruising around the living room playing. And all of a sudden he starts crying. So I'm like, okay, what happened? So he was playing with a piece of cardboard from like the insert in a 12-pack of beer. It was something silly that we were just letting him gnaw on because he was teething really bad that trip. Something that he couldn't really get in too much trouble with. So he dropped it, and we're looking. Hardwood floor, no carpet. We looked under the furniture thinking maybe it slid underneath. Nowhere to be found. So we joked and said that George had kept that as a souvenir because we were there. And clearly he liked to communicate with us. He knew that I could see him, all of those things. So there were several other times that when I had gone to visit, something strange would happen. And the only thing that made any sense was that there had to be some sort of otherworld entity that was causing all these things to happen. So my dad was getting ready to move out of this cabin. He had been there for many years at this point. And when he had moved in, he kind of made a promise that he would take care of it like it was his own as long as he was there. And he planned on being there for a long time, but things had changed and he found a better paying job. They didn't run as many cows on the land, so they really weren't working the land anymore. So there wasn't really any work for him to be doing. So he needed to go find another job. So he was taking his final couple loads of stuff out of the cabin to move to his new place. And he said that as he was climbing into his Jeep, he felt like somebody had poked a hot poker in his back out of nowhere. And he felt like it was, "You broke your promise to me." It's a big thing in the South. You don't really break your promise. You don't go back on your word, you know, things like that that's frowned upon. So he said that he felt like it was George saying, "You broke your promise to me," and that he was upset with him. I don't know that that's necessarily what happened, but that's his account of the story. So he finally got into his Jeep and he took his last load of stuff, and that was the end of that cabin. But we had many, many times had experiences on that property. So there were rumors that at the big house, at the mansion on the property, that there might have been some spirit entities there. I had been in the big house a few times. I never really felt anything. I had never seen anything like I did at the cabin. The cabin is where I experienced all of the paranormal stuff that I had ever experienced there. And same with my dad. He told me the same thing. I've been to the big house many times, never had anything happen up there. And multiple different generations had lived in that home. Lots of them had passed in that home. never felt anything. So the cabin was really significant to supernatural or paranormal activity. So that was probably the first instance that I had really seen a ghost and knew I had seen a ghost. That one was really specific. As a kid in our home that we grew up in, I can remember there being several times as a little girl that I had seen shadow figures. Really big, really tall shadow figures that were like totally black. And it always freaked me out. So our bedroom was across the hall from my mom's bedroom. And it was like the bathroom, my mom's room, our room, and then the hallway to go out into the living room. And so it always looked like there was something just standing in the doorway, kind of staring in the room at us. Really unsettling as a kid, right? So I can remember having nightmare after nightmare as a kid, and I didn't sleep well, even through into like my teenage years, adulthood. I always just couldn't sleep at night. I was very nocturnal. I was somebody that always functioned better at night, and I was never ever an early riser. I was never a morning person, all those things. And so at night, you can't sleep, you're tossing and turning, you know, your mind kind of starts to play tricks on you. So one night I remember sitting there and there was this dark figure that came and sat on the end of my bed. I had no idea what it was or who it was, but it was scary. And it just sat there. It didn't do anything. It didn't try and like touch me or anything. It just sat there. And then I, of course, you know, hid under my covers because that'll save us, right? We always think as little kids hiding under the blankets will save us. But it disappeared after a few seconds or whatever. And I didn't see it again for a long time. But one night in particular, there was a big windstorm that had happened, and we had kind of a dead tree out in our backyard at the end of the fence line, and it had been knocked completely down. It missed all the power lines somehow, but it had been knocked completely down, and the attic cover in the hallway of where all the bedrooms were had been moved up and twisted so that it was open. So we thought that was really strange. My oldest son's dad was staying there that night because I was having some complications. And so I said, could you just stay tonight, you know, and like, so I can sleep better. So he did. And so my mom said, you know, that was an omen. He shouldn't have been there. He was bad news for you or whatever. So that was a strange happening. I do paranormal investigations now. And so I've actually captured some entities. I'm going to include some screenshots. The video is posted here on YouTube in its entirety. Should you want to watch it, I will tag it in the comments of this video so that you guys can go see it. It is marked, so it's time stamped on that video. If you go to it and you click the timestamp, you will see it. It happens extremely quick. I would say within 3 to 5 seconds. So it happens in these double doors. There's a window and then there's the opening of the door. And in the first part, you can see in the video, we're getting ready to collect our things and go to the next spot on the property. We had already been there several hours, and so we were gathering up our stuff, deciding what we were going to do next. And you see the light peering behind the door, and then you start to see this little dark circle, and it grows very quickly, and then it looks like a head peering around the corner. So that is something that we captured. I didn't see it initially when we were gathering our equipment, but one of the people that I was on the ghost hunt with called me after the fact and said, did you happen to notice this at such and such time? And I said, I didn't see it while I was uploading the footage, but it was an amazing capture. So I took screenshots of it so that you can see in more detail it kind of morphing into the human face or the entity that you can see it. So I've caught countless orbs in photographs, digital photos, Polaroid photos, things like that. You know, just lots of different things that I've seen over the years. When I channel, I'm typically talking to spirits, people's entities, souls that have crossed over that are no longer living. And many, many years ago, when I was dating my boyfriend, I had a dream one night, and it was his dad that was coming through. I didn't know his parents before they passed away. I had known him since high school, but I didn't know his family. I think I had met his brother maybe one time. So long story short on that, one night I have a dream and it's his dad that comes through, and I can see him very clearly, and he's just kind of sitting there with me. We're shooting the shit, we're talking, we're laughing, and then he gets really serious. And he shows me a piece of jewelry and he says, I need you to really focus on what this looks like. I need you to be able to remember it so that my sons will know that I actually do come through, and that this is your proof. This is your, what I call a validation point, so that they know that it's real, because they don't really believe in that stuff, or they didn't, at least until that point. So I describe it to him a day or so later after the dream, have a conversation and say, did your dad have like a piece of jewelry that he was super proud of? It's not a wedding ring, but like a piece of jewelry that maybe he really liked or that was important to him. And he says, well, I don't know, you're the psychic, you tell me. And so I described to him what happened, tell him that I had a conversation, tell him that he showed me this ring. And I described it to him. I said, it's got a big red stone in the middle. It might be a ruby or a garnet, I'm not sure. And it's a gold ring. It's kind of big, kind of chunky, kind of flashy. Reminded me of something maybe a pimp would wear, you know, or a gangster. And I watched the color drain out of his face and his eyes get all big, and him say, how in the literal fuck would you know that? And I said, well, do you understand what it is? And he said, yeah, he did have a ring like that, but we don't have it anymore. It's gone, has been for a long time. And I know I never told you about that. So how would you know that? I wouldn't, but your dad came in a dream and he showed me and he told me that it was important. And so I'm trying to give you validation that he's clearly around. So I don't think he still believed me at first. I think he was just kind of like, that's too weird. That's just crazy. How would she know that? And so I would have dreams throughout the years about him. Sometimes his mom would come through. His dad is way more vocal about things, especially in dreams, than his mom was. One time I remember at our old house, I woke up smelling like food was cooking, and I thought, fuck yeah, someone's making breakfast and it isn't me today. So I get all excited. I go out there and there's nobody there. The house is quiet. Everyone's still asleep. There's no food made. That was sad. But I saw like this mist in the kitchen, and I thought, what the heck is that? Like, I thought maybe it was smoke. It was like a grayish silver mist in the kitchen. I didn't see a human form. It just looked like smoke was there, and then it dissipated. And I thought, what in the heck is going on? Like, I know I smelled food. I know I did. I didn't hear noises, but I could smell it, and it smelled amazing. Like fresh coffee, bacon, eggs, like you could smell it. And so I was very disappointed because I was hungry when I woke up. And then I was just kind of dumbfounded, like, what is going on? Why could I smell that, but there was literally nothing there? So I thought that was kind of strange. So everybody raved about how his mom was such an amazing cook, right? She made stuff from scratch, and everybody raved about how good of a cook she was. I never met her, so I didn't get to know any of that. But that was something that had happened a few times as well. So one night we were just talking, just goofing off, just hanging out. And I could, in my mind's eye, I could see both of them standing behind my boyfriend at the time. And so I kind of described them a little bit, and I said, well, I definitely pick up their energy around you. Like, I can see, you know, your dad, I can see your mom. They're shorter in stature, like they're tiny little people and everything, but they're definitely around you all the time. And so I would pick up on their energy. I could tell if they were around, things like that. And then his dad would come through and real specific things. Another dream that I had in the future, he had shown me this really big book, and I didn't know what it was exactly. I assumed that it was a Bible, but it was like 3 foot tall, like 1.5 feet wide, and it was like bound in red leather, and it was massive. I had never seen a book that big before. You know, your average book's like yay big or whatever. This was big, and he was holding it and he was showing me, he was flipping through pages, and he kept like showing me there were numbers. Well, I remembered when I woke up, so I wrote it all down. And if you look at my book, Stepping Stones to Destiny, it's in there. I talk about these things in great detail. And he kept giving me all these numbers. I didn't know what the numbers meant. I didn't know if it was a date. I didn't know if it was like something that was coming up or if it was like GPS coordinates. I had no idea. So I wrote it all down. So we ended up telling John's brother Matt about all of these things happening, and he said, well, you know, my dad was really a believer in all that stuff, so if anybody was going to come through, it would be him. And he's come through on several different occasions with different things coming up that are important events for his family. He'll sometimes come through. His mom would come through and she would usually like say something in my ear. I've heard her like go up and tuck him into bed, you know, different things like that, little glimpses that I've seen of them or felt them around. So there's been so many different instances where there's been spirit activity around my life that I didn't realize that they were trying to communicate, right? Because I didn't really realize I was a medium until much later in my life. So ghosts are very real, and this time of year, the veil that is between worlds is thinner. And on Halloween specifically, it is at its thinnest, meaning that they are able to kind of pierce the veil or communicate easier with the living. And so there's many different places all around the globe that celebrate different holidays or observe different times to honor their dead, their deceased loved ones. So in Mexican culture, they have the Day of the Dead. I don't know how to say it exactly in Spanish, so I don't want to botch it. And they have these festivals and carnivals and parades and all these things to honor their deceased loved ones. In Europe, they have Samhain, which is the same thing. It's like Halloween. We have Halloween in America. We also have, I'm trying to remember. I always get this one wrong and I don't know why. Hang on, let me look it up. All Hallows Eve, that's what that one's called. I don't know why I couldn't remember that. So there's many different names for Halloween, or the celebration of honoring our dead. And so that happens in many different places around the globe. And so we are going to do a whole nother episode about the origins of Halloween and where it comes from. So we aren't going to get too deep into that one for this one. This one we're focusing on ghosts. So I want to include the photos, the still shots that I took of what we captured at the paranormal investigation. I wish I had pictures of what George was like to see him in his full glory, his full-bodied apparition, because that was very unique. And I can honestly say that's the only time so far that I have ever seen a full-bodied apparition. I was petrified at the time, but I look back at it now and it's like, that was really kind of like the tipping point for my gifts kind of coming online. Before that, I would say that I would get like goosebumps on maybe one side of my body or feel like something was there, but no tentative or visual proof of that. And then going forward from that, now I see things on a regular basis. I feel things all the time. I know that spirit is all around us. So Halloween is definitely one of my favorite times of year. It always has been. I always thought it was so much fun to like dress up and, you know, scary, silly, whatever. It was just a lot of fun to me. I love to see all the little kids in their costumes. You know, I'm not a big one on the horror side of things. That was never something that I liked, but it was always fun to just go to like corn mazes or haunted houses, things like that. I always enjoyed that as a kid. And so going forward in my life, I still love to decorate. Clearly I have, you know, decorations in my office and things like that, just for the sheer fun of it. So as we approach Halloween, you may also encounter different things in your world. So try not to let that totally rock your world or scare you in any way, because they do just want to let us know that they're around. I have so many people that I've loved in my lifetime, friends, family that have passed on, that I always think it's cool if they leave me a little sign that they're still around. I always think it's really neat that they do try and communicate, because, you know, the other side is magical. So it's awesome that they still try and communicate with us little lame humans down here, you know, on planet Earth. So I always think that's pretty neat. So have you ever captured a ghost? Have you ever captured orbs? Do you know what the difference is? An orb is like a ball of light. Now I do have some photographs. I would really have to dig for those. They're very old, hiccups for confirmation. They're very old photographs that I have that do have some orbs in them. My oldest stepdaughter, when she was going to prom with her date one night, we were taking some photos and I happened to capture some orbs. At first I tried to debunk it. I thought, oh, that's just, it's light reflecting. It's just, a camera anomaly, things like that. Until I started to zoom into the picture and you could see facial features. It happened to be two circles that were like kind of on top of each other. And as you zoomed in, you could see eye sockets, a nose, and a mouth in both. So we think that it was probably her grandparents that aren't here, excited that their first grandchild was going to prom, right? They wanted to pose in the picture. So that was a pretty unique one. And then the one at the paranormal investigation where we captured the ball turning into a facial structure, that was pretty cool. But I've caught orbs on different still shots and digital shots. I've caught it on film, on video. I've caught it in Polaroid pictures, things like that. So they are able to be captured. Very rarely do I hear like a, they call it voice phenomena, or do you hear like auditory? I'm a person that doesn't like to use spirit boxes. I know there's lots of people out there that swear by them. They think they're great. I don't. I think that spirit will find a way to communicate. If they want to verbalize something to where you can hear it, they will. They will find a way to do that. Sometimes you can hear them with your own ears. You can actually hear them. Sometimes we'll capture it on film or voice recording that you can hear it. It might be really faint. It might come through as like a quiet whisper. I've had it to where I can hear them like buzzing in my ear, but I can't make out actual words. I've had a ghost come and whisper in my ear before. I've been touched on the back of the hand. I've had my hair played with, like countless different things that have happened. So I know that spirit is quite real. So I would be curious to hear any of you guys' experience. If you want to leave me a comment, if you've ever had a ghostly encounter, I would love to know. If you'd want to share it on an episode, that would also be amazing. So I do want to cover some basics in here of where some of the folklore comes from. Okay, so in folklore, a ghost is the soul or a spirit of a dead person or a non-human animal that is believed by some people to be able to appear to the living. So just like I had seen with George. In ghost lore, descriptions of ghosts vary widely, from an invisible presence to translucent or barely visible wispy shapes to realistic, lifelike forms. There we go. So just like I had seen George as he manifested into his human-like presence, he was translucent. You could see through him. He wasn't solid, like you can't see through me. And he had that silvery blue hue that wrapped all the way around him. So that was definitely something that I saw. The deliberate attempt to contact the spirit of a deceased person is known as necromancy, or in spiritism as a seance. I personally don't do things like that. Because I'm a believer that you're opening a portal and we don't want just any old riffraff coming on in. We do not want that. We don't want demonic entities. We don't want lower vibrational presences coming in. So I don't mess with Ouija boards, never have, never will. Don't do that. It's a bad idea. I also will not do things like a seance. What I do instead is I go in and I contact places like cemeteries, okay, final resting places, places that are rumored to be haunted, that have been there a very long time, that have known spirit activity, things like that. And I talk to them as if they're still alive, as a human being, not as a ghost. And so I don't try and be disrespectful to them in any way, shape, or form. I try really hard to always be respectful no matter who I'm trying to communicate with or where I'm at. And I feel like I get better results that way. Now, you will see people out there that do that sort of thing, and they're trying to, do it for TV, movies, or YouTube type stuff to kind of antagonize these spirits to get them to react. I wouldn't recommend that. Just like you wouldn't want somebody to come to your family's maybe final resting place or grave and be disrespectful. I don't do those things for that reason. And so I feel like I do get better results because I do treat them with respect. So that's my 2 cents on that. I would not participate in a seance or anything of the sort. So other terms that are associated with it are apparition, haunt, haint, phantom, poltergeist, shade, specter, spirit, spook, wraith, demon, and ghoul. So those are some names that are associated with ghosts. The belief in the existence of an afterlife, as well as manifestations of the spirits of the dead, is widespread, dating back to animalism or ancestor worship in pre-literature cultures. Certain religious practices, funeral rites, exorcisms, and some practices of spiritualism and ritual magic are generally thought to, are generally described as solitary human-like essences, though stories of ghostly armies and the ghosts of animals other than humans have also been recounted. So on the whole thing of ghostly armies, one of my bucket lists is to have the money to be able to go to Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, and to do a paranormal walk through there. I'm a working stiff just like everybody else in the world, but that is on my bucket list. So I would love to have the means to go do that and to go film it for my YouTube channel. So Gettysburg, we know, was a horrific battlefield way back when in the Civil War. And so I have personally seen video and photographs of ghostly entities on the battlefield. And what's so crazy to me is how many there are, even in broad daylight. You can see soldiers like walking up to what looks like a stationary cannon that's there, right? Because it's a historical artifact. And looking like they're loading the charge and they're putting it in, and then they duck down as they light it. And you can see them going through the motions, almost like their energy is on a loop, that it's just stuck on repeat. You can see entities walking across the battlefield. You can see them coming out of the trees. You can see them in their uniform, and you can typically make out features. They are translucent in color, like a silvery blue-gray color, but you can see the human essence that's still around them. So that's one of the places I would love to go. The Stanley Hotel, right? Because it's rumored to be super haunted. There's castles and things that I would love to go to. There's places in America, there's places abroad, there's places literally all over the world, right? Human beings have been on this planet for a long time, and so I believe that when we pass, we leave a little bit of an imprint, especially if we passed in a tragic means. Let's say we were murdered by somebody, okay? There's probably an imprint of energy left behind there. And so that energy might like loop through at certain times, maybe the anniversary of when it happened, maybe that person's birthday, maybe there's renovations going on in a place that this person had lived, things like that. We tend to see an influx of spirit energy going on in those places at that time. So those are some places that I would love to go to and be able to actually document what I catch, if I catch anything. And the hopes is always that we do. So these ghosts are believed to haunt particular locations, objects, or people that they were associated with in life. So if you go to things like estate sales, if you go antiquing, just know that there could definitely be some energy attached to those items. I'm a person who, unless it was my own family stuff, I don't necessarily want that energy in my house for any reason. So if you do, I would highly encourage you to energetically clear it somehow, either with like incense or smoke, sound like a singing bowl, bells, things like that, to really get rid of what could be attached to it. So what comes to mind with that is we've all heard of the Annabelle doll, right? The Ed and Lorraine Warren, they had this museum that was next to their home, and they had all these different artifacts that were rumored to be possessed or haunted in some way, shape, or form, right? They had an attachment to it. So I do believe that that is possible. I do believe that something might attach its energy after it passes to something specific, good or bad, okay? And so it needs like a host or a vessel to actually like be stuck to, if that makes more sense. So there are definite proof and different accounts that people have had all over the world of something being haunted, whether it's an object, a home, things like that. So definitely some accounts of that. So according to a 2009 study by the Pew Research Center, 18% of Americans say that they have seen a ghost. So have you? Have you seen a ghost? The overwhelming consensus of science is that there is no proof that ghosts exist. So science is always trying to debunk things, right? I always say trust your gut because it knows more than science probably does. Their existence is impossible to falsify, and ghost hunting has been classified as pseudoscience. Despite centuries of investigation, there is no scientific evidence that any location is inhabited by the spirits of the dead. Historically, certain toxic or psychoactive plants, such as Datura or Hyoscyamus niger, who has long been associated with necromancy and the underworld, have been shown to contain anticholinergic compounds that are pharmacologically linked to dementia, as well as histological patterns of neurodegeneration. So what they're saying is that certain people have ingested these substances which like rot the brain or can be an early onset of things like dementia or the brain starting to degenerate. Recent research has indicated that ghost sightings may be related to degenerative brain diseases such as Alzheimer's disease. Wouldn't that be something crazy, right? Oh, well, you don't just have dementia or Alzheimer's. You thought you were hallucinating. It's really just the brain that's starting to decay. That would be pretty crazy, right? We do know that there's instances. I have family members that had Alzheimer's and dementia, and they are kind of off in their own world when it starts to progress, right? They don't have a concept of current time and place. They have issues with cognition, remembering things. And as time progresses, it starts to worsen because the brain is really literally shutting down. So different parts of the brain start to be affected, and eventually the brain ceases to operate the rest of the body. And that's what really usually makes them pass away. So there are certain sleep aids that might also in rare instances cause ghost-like hallucinations, particularly one called zolpidem, Zolpidem, and dihephenhydramine. So some of these could cause ghost-like hallucinations. Other reports link to carbon monoxide poisoning to ghost-like hallucinations. So those are things that I didn't actually know. So could you imagine if like your furnace was leaking gas and you were breathing that not knowing, right? Because you didn't have a carbon monoxide detector. You should have one of those. And you started hallucinating thinking you were seeing ghosts, and really you're just being poisoned by carbon monoxide. Wild concept, right? Pretty crazy things. All right, so the English word ghost comes from an Old English gast, breath, spirit, soul, or ghost, which can be traced back to Germanic ghost or spirit. All right, so we have many different languages that have a word for ghost. They all have something to do with spirit, demon, ghosts. Some of them have to do with anger. Some of them have to do with it's terrible, things like that. So all over the world, there's some sort of term for a ghost. So it gives some sort of reason that people have probably seen something, right? Because you wouldn't have a name for it if somebody hadn't seen those things. So another one that they bring up is revenant, and we talked about that in last week's episode with the werewolves, or a revenant. Vampires were also another one called a revenant. Why? It's what's left over after the soul crosses, and that's like the best description that I can give. So it says, a revenant is a deceased person returning from the dead to haunt the living, either as a disembodied ghost or alternatively as an animated undead corpse. It's also related to the concept of a fetch, the visible ghost or a spirit of a person yet alive. So there's lots of different names for a ghost. There's lots of different places around the world that believe that ghosts are real. So a notion of the transcendent, supernatural, or numinous usually involves entities like ghosts, demons, or deities as a cultural universal. So no matter what religious practice you have, no matter where in the world you are, there is some sort of tale or folklore or belief that things are cursed, haunted, or that spiritual activity or ghosts exist. So there's also many cultures that believe in malignant or restless ghosts, right? The bad ones that are distinguished from the more benign spirits involved, or ancestor worship, right? So you're not going to go to a cemetery thinking that you're going to be dealing with negative entities, negative spirits, right? You're going there to worship your dead, or to bring offering, or to commune with those spirits, right? They were your family, they were your ancestors, and that's why you go, is to pay respects and talk to them, right? To honor them. And so that's totally different from things that we see in like Hollywood movies, where it's evil, it's dark, it's demonic, it's possessive, it's, all of these poltergeists and things like that. So where does the line blur? That's something that I think is interesting. Why do we think certain spirits, just because they were part of our bloodline, are good? Maybe they were a shitty person in their life, right? Maybe we don't want anything to do with that energy because it was really dark, it was really negative. And so you do see things like that. What comes to mind, and this is a strange one, but what comes to mind is there's stories of the Underground Railroad and people who were slave owners and things like that, who are really terrible people that still haunt certain places, right? It's like restless energy, just like it's talking about restless ghosts, things that are unsettled, okay? Versus your great Aunt Lucy, who was the sweetest woman in the world, who you just want to go bring her flowers on her birthday or something. So very, very definitive differences between the two. So let's talk ancestor worship. So it typically involves rites intended to prevent revenants, vengeful spirits of the dead. So what they would do is people imagined them as starving or envious of the living. So the strategies for preventing revenants might include things like a sacrifice, giving the dead food or drink to pacify them, or magical banishment of the deceased to force them not to return. So what comes to mind is why we started to celebrate things like All Hallows Eve, Halloween, Day of the Dead in Mexico, things like that, Samhain. It's a day of honoring them with food, drink, wine, a plate of food, right? We go trick-or-treating, we ask for tricks or treats, right? Candy, things like that, an offering, okay? So all of these things started somewhere, they came from somewhere. So ritual feeding of the dead is performed in traditions like the Chinese Ghost Festival or the Western All Souls Day. Magical banishment of the dead is present in many of the world's burial customs. The bodies found in many kurgan had been ritually bound before burial, and the custom of binding the dead persists, for example, in rural Anatolia. So in 19th century, anthropologist James Frazer stated that in his classic work, The Golden Bog, that souls were seen as the creature within that animated the body. So think of your soul. So the soul is part of your psyche. It's what connects us to divine energy. It's how we're all able to be psychic. And yes, you're psychic. I promise you are. And so part of that, your soul is like your essence of who you are. So my understanding from spirit is that your soul, your essence of who you are, continues on in many, many different lifetimes through many, many different forms, right? Our physical body. And so while that might change, you might be a different sex in a different life. So I've been a man in different lifetimes. You might be like, let's say your spouse now is your sibling in a different life, or your grandparent in a different life. We play different roles. Think of it like an actor changing roles. So your essence of who you are wants to learn all of these different lessons in different lifetimes. So some of those might be really difficult lessons to master and learn, but your soul gains knowledge from that. And that's the purpose why you keep reincarnating into different forms. And so as Spirit explained it to me, it's that we are changing these roles to master different things, and then we kind of like report back to home or in the afterlife, and we kind of dissect all the different lessons, things we would have changed, things we would have done differently in our life review when we pass away. And then we are asked if we want to go back basically to Earth to learn more lessons, and we have the option to reincarnate. Some people don't want to come back right away. Some people stay on the other side and do different things over there. And some people do want to keep coming back over and over again to accomplish more for their soul's journey. So it's a really interesting thing that they showed me. So there's lots of different things going on throughout the afterlife, and there's lots of things that people believe having to do with the afterlife. So, although the human soul has sometimes symbolically or literally been depicted in ancient cultures as a bird or other animals, that makes me think of like ancient Egyptian deities, it typically appears to have been widely held that the soul was an exact reproduction of the body in every feature, even down to clothing that the person wore. On that note, when I saw George in his physical body, I could tell that he had on a flannel shirt, he had on jeans. I could see his entire face, just like I can see my reflection in the camera. So it was very accurate to that when he presented himself, this was the last version that he had incarnated in, down to a T. Everything I could tell, just like I could look at another living person and see those finite details. The only difference was I could see through him, and he had a translucentness to him, and he had that silvery blue hue that encompassed his whole body, the outline of him. So I found that to be really interesting too. So this depicted in artwork from various ancient cultures, including such works as the Egyptian Book of the Dead, which shows deceased people in the afterlife appearing much as they did before death, including their style of dress. And so that makes sense too when you think of like old Victorian homes that would be haunted. Maybe you see people in Victorian dress, right? The high collars and the hats and their hair done up a certain way, the big dresses, the corsets, right? All of those things, we would see those and we would go, oh, well, that's a really old, style of dress. So that has to be an old ghost that's haunting things, right? Same would be said for anywhere, throughout time. If you were to see a ghost of something from way back when, and what comes to mind again is like the Civil War soldiers in Gettysburg, and they do show up in translucent form, but you can see their uniform. You can see facial features. You can see all of these things going on. So it stands to reason that that is an actual thing because many people have accounted those. There is a major fear of ghosts for a lot of people, and I will tell you that originally I was very unsure of ghosts and always very curious, but it's like I didn't want them to show up in their full-bodied apparition and go boom, and scare you. Sorry about the jump scare. But that does happen, right? So we do get scared by these things that we don't understand, and that's a very real fear that a lot of people have. Not everybody likes ghost hunting. My boyfriend will tell you that is not his cup of tea. I ask him all the time, hey, do you want to go look at this place? Hey, you want to go with me? Not really. No. Could we do something else? It's not his cup of tea, and that's totally okay. So, while deceased ancestors are universally regarded as vulnerable and often believed to have continued presence in some form of the afterlife, the spirit of a deceased person that persists in the material world, a ghost, is regarded as an unnatural or undesirable state of affairs, and the idea of ghosts or revenants is also associated with a reaction of fear, right? It's unsettling to see a ghost. I was paralyzed with fear when I saw George, so I can understand why people are like, I don't want anything to do with that. If my house was haunted, it would freak me the heck out, right? So a lot of people have this fear, and for most of it is probably for a really good reason. So this is universally the case in pre-modern folk cultures, there we go. But fear of ghosts also remains an integral aspect of the modern ghost story, gothic horror, and other horror fiction dealing with the supernatural. So let's talk about some common attributes that ghosts have. Another widespread belief concerning ghosts is that they are composed of a misty, airy, or subtle material, right? Because you can see through them. Typically, they're somewhat translucent. So let's see, I lost my place there. Anthropologists link this idea to early beliefs that ghosts were the person within the person's spirit. Most notable in ancient cultures as a person's breath, which upon exhaling in colder climates appears visibly as a white mist. So we've all seen that, right? In the wintertime or when it's cold, you can see your breath. So what this is talking about is that you could see the entity in the mist or in like the breath, right? So let's say you're exhaling the hot air and all of a sudden entity appears in front of you. That would be unsettling. I'm not saying that it wouldn't startle you. It absolutely probably would. But they're saying that this breath, or as they would call it, the breath, was synonymous with seeing spirit activity. So this belief might have also fostered the metaphorical meaning of breath in certain languages, such as Latin. It's called spiritus, and the Greek, pneumia, which by analog became extended to mean the soul. In the Bible, God is depicted as synthesizing Adam as a living soul from the dust of the earth and the breath of God, right? That's how Adam was supposedly created. It's very interesting. So the breath has something to do with that. They also talk about like the breath of life, right? Which is your essence, your soul. And when that breath goes out, then like your soul leaves. There's also another account, and I would have to look that up as well, but that the soul actually weighs a certain amount. So let me find that because that was important. So this is a little off topic, but since we're thinking about it, I wanted to look it up. So a human soul is said to weigh 21 grams. A figure originating from the discredited 1907 21 grams experiment by a Dr. Duncan McDougall, who observed a tiny weight loss in a patient at the moment of death and attributed it to the soul's departure. However, modern science cannot measure the soul as it is a spiritual concept, not a physical one. So there are several experiments that were done trying to kind of prove or disprove this 21 gram theory. So in the experiment in 1907, Dr. McDougall conducted experiments using special built scales to weigh dying patients. He believed that if the soul was a physical entity, that it would have weight and be measurable at the moment of death. The result, McDougall observed a small, unexplained weight loss in one patient and concluded that it was the weight of the soul. So he had one person that this happened with, and he said it had to be what the soul weighed. So in the flawed thoughts of this experiment, it's considered flawed and unscientific due to a small sample size, inaccurate measurements, and the fact that McDougall selectively reported results from only one of his 6 human subjects. So it may or may not be the weight of the soul, but I always thought that was kind of an interesting experiment. I heard it many years ago, so it came to mind, so I figured I'd share. So there's many traditional accounts of ghosts that were often thought to be deceased people looking for vengeance or a vengeful ghost. It could have also been imprisoned on earth for bad things that they did during life, right? We hear about people going and doing ghost hunting in former prisons, things that are shut down and not operational anymore. Alcatraz comes to mind. There's, closed down mental hospitals that are rumored to be extremely active, things like that. Things that would have had maybe negative energy surrounding that, or maybe they were experimented on, maybe they were mistreated or tortured, executed, things like that. So that leaves energy behind, right? And not great energy. So I would imagine some of those places are extremely, extremely haunted, lots of activity. I personally have not gotten to tour anything like that, but if I get the opportunity, I absolutely would participate. So, have you ever heard of the White Ladies? That's one that is reported in many rural areas around the world and is supposed to have died tragically or suffered some sort of trauma in life. Like the Lady in White, I think, is a story that I've heard since childhood of basically a woman that was either like killed, murdered, or lost her child, and that she's roaming looking for said things, or that she's looking for help. That's a story that I know I've heard. The White Lady legends are found around the world. Common to many of them is the theme of losing a child or a husband and a sense of purity, as opposed to the Lady in Red, the ghost that is mostly attributed to a jilted lover or a prostitute. The White Lady ghost is often associated with an individual family line or regarded as a harbinger of death, similar to a banshee. So there's lots of accounts of that as well. Legends of ghost ships have existed since the 18th century. Most notable of these is the Flying Dutchman, and I believe that was one of the ships in the Pirates of the Caribbean series. And I can't remember the captain's name, but he was significant in that as well. This theme has been used in literature in The Rime of the Ancient Mariner by Samuel Taylor Coleridge. Ghosts are often depicted as being covered in a shroud and or dragging chains. You always wonder where some of these things came from, right? It's like, what did the chains have to do with anything? Were they a prisoner? Were they a slave? Were they bound? Were they imprisoned? Things like that. Why were chains synonymous, right? I can remember old movies. I want to say it was like a Scrooge movie or something to do with like the Scrooge character, and that he's haunted by 3 different ghosts in the movie. And it's been years since I've seen it, but I remember one of them had chains, right? And it's like shaking the chains. You've heard different accounts of people, oh yeah, you hear the ghosts in the attic rattling the chains. It's like, where did that come from? Why did we think that they were rattling chains? Why would that be a thing? But apparently sometimes that is how they present. All right, so a place where ghosts are reported as described as haunted and often seen as being inhabited by spirits of deceased who may have been former residents or were familiar with the property. So in some regard, they didn't even live there, right? They were just familiar with the property. Maybe they really liked it and they just wanted to put up shop there and hang out. There could definitely be some supernatural activity inside homes. It is said to be mainly associated with violent or tragic events in the building's past, such as a murder, accidental death, or even a suicide. Sometimes in the recent or ancient past. However, not all hauntings are at a place of a violent death or even on violent grounds. So that's really important. Just because a place might be inhabited by a ghost does not mean that that person met a horrible, tragic end. In some cases, they absolutely just loved being there, and so it's familiar territory to them. Like in my case with George, he built that cabin by his own 2 hands. It was his favorite place to be. So it would stand to reason that you'd want to return to a place that felt like home. So I feel like there's definitely some themes where, you know, there's hauntings because they did come to a violent end, where things were not good. Maybe it's a spirit that's trying to seek justice for how their final moments went. Let's say, for instance, somebody was tragically harmed, murdered, things like that. Let's say, because it does happen, let's just say that an entity came to a medium and as a result, they gained closure or justice for their own death, right? I've heard of these accounts that a ghost has solved its own murder. I don't think it happens often, but I have heard of that actually happening, and that the police department worked with a psychic or a medium, and that they were able to gain enough information to actually kind of fill in the blanks and solve the crime. I don't think, again, that it happens all that often, but I do think that it does happen. I've also been asked by people if the opportunity ever presented itself, would I do that? Would I assist that? If I was ever put in that position, yes, I would. I would absolutely help, because I've lost friends in tragedy, family in tragedy, and things like that. And I would want to help give somebody closure if I was able to do so. So the answer is yes, I would. I've never been approached. if that ever changes, I would absolutely help. So let's see, what else do we want to include here? Should we include some of the history? I think we should. So near ancient East and Egypt, we're going to talk about some of that. There are many references to ghosts in the Mesopotamian religions, the regions of Sumer, Babylon, Assyria, and other early states in Mesopotamia. Traces of these beliefs survive in the later Abrahamic, I don't know why words are so hard today. We're just going to say that it has to do with Mesopotamia because I can't get that word out today. All right, so let's see. The concept of ghosts may predate many belief systems. Ghosts were thought to be created at the time of death, taking on the memory and personality of the dead person. So people way back when thought that they were created at the time of death, that they would look like that person, they would have memories of that person, and the personality of that person. They traveled to the netherworld, where they were assigned a position and led an existence similar in some ways to that of the living. So it was thought that they went from their living form to a ghost form, and that they resembled the person in every way, and that they had some sort of a similar life or existence in heaven, in the other world, in the underworld, the afterlife, the other side. Relatives of the dead were expected to make offerings of food and drink to the dead to ease their conditions, right? Because they were suffering without food. I'm a big girl. I like food. So I would be happy if my family brought me food, right? If they did not, the ghosts could inflict misfortune and illness on the living. Traditional healing practices ascribed a variety of illnesses to the action of ghosts, while others were caused by gods or demons. So they thought that if you didn't feed them and water them and bring them things, that they would haunt you, right? That they would be unhappy, and that they could inflict illness or misfortune on you. So that is why they started to honor them with different things. There was widespread belief in ghosts in ancient Egyptian culture. The Hebrew Bible contains few references to ghosts, associating spiritism with forbidden occult activities listed in Deuteronomy. The most notable references is the first book of Samuel, in which a disguised King Saul has the witch of Endor summon the spirit or ghost of Samuel. So that is in the Bible. It's 1 Samuel 28, verse 3 through 19. Okay. The soul and spirit were believed to exist after death, with the ability to assist or harm the living, and the possibility of a second death. That one has always been strange to me. It's like, you don't really kill a spirit. You might banish them from where you're at, but you can't really kill something that's already dead, right? It doesn't make sense to me. So you might banish a spirit from where you are, from your presence, but it's still in the ethers. It's still there, right? Because your essence, your soul, it lives on eternal. It's an eternal soul. So there isn't really a way that I have understood that you are able to like kill a spirit. You might banish one, but that's about it. So over a period of more than 2,500 years, Egyptians believed about the nature of the afterlife evolved constantly. Many of these beliefs were recorded in their hieroglyphs or their inscriptions, papyrus scrolls, and tomb paintings, and the Egyptian Book of the Dead. It compiles some of the beliefs from the different periods of ancient Egyptian history. In modern times, the fanciful concept of a mummy coming back to life and wreaking vengeance when disturbed has spawned a whole genre of horror stories and films. So there aren't any actual accounts, to my knowledge, of that actually being a real thing. It was, made for TV, Hollywood, all of those things, because how crazy is that, right? Now, my personal belief is that even though we want the knowledge from what all these hieroglyphs meant and what the scrolls say, we still shouldn't have disrupted their final resting place. And to me, that's something that I have a problem with on a personal level, because I would feel horrible if somebody went and disturbed my family's final resting place, no matter what it was. A pyramid, a temple, a gravestone, all of those things, right? To me, I feel like that's wrong. You should go there with respect. you should never go there with the intent to disrupt, dismantle, or destroy. So that's my own personal 2 cents. I don't agree with it. I understand they're trying to document those things, but on a personal level, I don't like it. I think that it's wrong. So while there could have been, and I say could have been very loosely, there could have been like some curses that maybe came about after the fact. We don't know, right? Did they enchant those pharaohs or the queens or these people that were important in their culture? Did they enchant their final resting place with something that maybe if it was disturbed would create harm? There are accounts that really terrible things have happened to the people responsible for that. Grave robbers, people that go in there and steal priceless artifacts, things like that. Not necessarily the archaeologists and historians, although I do believe there have been accounts where they have met a very unfortunate end after they have done these things. So I'll leave it up to you to decide. There could definitely be some truth to that. All right, so we know globally that ghosts are a thing, right? That we know all these cultures believed that there were ghosts. Greeks and Romans, Egyptians, all that. So we're going to talk about medieval Europe. So ghosts reported in medieval Europe tended to fall into 2 different categories: the souls of the dead, or demons. The souls of the dead returned for a specific purpose. Demonic ghosts existed only to torment or to tempt the living. The living could tell them apart by demanding their purpose in the name of Jesus Christ. The soul of a dead person would divulge its mission, while a demonic ghost would be banished at the sound of the holy name. So if it was just Great Aunt Lucy coming to say hello, she wanted to come for Sunday dinner, she would tell you what she was there to do, while a demonic entity would have to scatter in the name of Jesus. Most ghosts were souls assigned to purgatory, condemned for a specific period to atone for their transgressions in their life. Their penance was generally related to their sin. I personally don't believe that. I have never encountered a spirit that has told me or expressed concern that they're stuck in what's known as purgatory or in between heaven and hell. I've never encountered that. So I personally don't believe that. I do believe that Earth is more of hell than an actual realm of hell. However, I do believe that there is a lower realm that exists, whether it's hell, whether it's something else. And I wholeheartedly believe that we have an afterlife and we have a heaven or a very peaceful, harmonious place. I've seen glimpses of it many, many times when I channel, so I wholeheartedly believe that that exists. So that's my own 2 cents and what I have seen from spirit. So their presence was generally related to their sin. For example, the ghost of a man who had been abusive to his servants was condemned to tear off and swallow bits of his own tongue. Sounds awful. The ghost of another man who had neglected to leave his cloak to the poor was condemned to wear the cloak, now heavy as a church tower. These ghosts appeared to the living to ask for prayers to end their suffering. Other dead souls returned to urge the living to confess their sins before their own deaths. Now that last one I have actually encountered. I can't remember exactly who I was reading for, but something to the effect of they wanted the living person to get their life straight. I think they were deep in drugs and alcohol and certain addictions and things, and it was ruining their entire life. That typically happens, right? And so the person that I was channeling was either a parental figure or a grandparent telling them, you've got to change your ways. You don't want to end up where the bad people go, basically, is what they were referring to. And so saying, don't live like I did, change your ways before it's too late. You want to go to heaven, you don't want to go to hell, basically. So that was a entity that I had channeled that had come through with that. In the medieval European ghosts were more substantial than ghosts described in the Victorian age. There are also accounts of ghosts being wrestled with and physically restrained until a priest could arrive to hear its confession. Now that's a new one I had never heard. Some were less solid and could move through walls. Often they were described as paler and sadder versions of the person that they had been while alive and dressed in tattered gray rags. The vast majority of reported sightings were male. Interesting. There were some reported cases of ghostly armies fighting battles at night in the forest or in the remains of an Iron Age hill fort, as at Wandlebury near Cambridge, England. Living knights were sometimes challenged to single combat by phantom knights, which vanished when defeated. Interesting. From the medieval period, an apparition of a ghost is recorded from 1211. At the time of the Albigensian Crusade, Gervase of Tilbury, Marshal of Arles, wrote that the image of Gulhim, a boy recently murdered in the forest, appeared in his cousin's home in Beaucaire near Avington. Say all that 5 times fast. The series of visits lasted all of the summer. Though his cousin who spoke for him, the boy allegedly held conversations with anyone who wished until the local priest requested to speak to the boy directly, leading to an extended distinguishing of the theology. The boy narrated the trauma of death and the unhappiness of his fellow souls in purgatory and reported that God was most pleased with the ongoing crusade against the Cathar heretics, launched 3 years earlier. The time of the crusade in southern France was marked by intense and prolonged warfare, this constant bloodshed and dislocation of populations being the context for these reported visits by the murdered boy. How interesting. Haunted houses are also featured in the 9th century Arabian Nights as the tale of Ali the Kareen and the haunted house of Baghdad. So there's European Renaissance and Romanticism associated with ghosts. The Renaissance magic took a revived interest in the occult, including necromancy, right, with ghosts. In the era of the Reformation and Counter-Reformation, there was frequently a backlash against unwholesome interest in the dark arts, typified by writers such as Thomas Iratus. Let's see. So there were several writers at that time. Let's see. In 1868, there were recounts of the story of a ghost returning to his fiancée, begging her to free him from his promise to marry her. So your fiancé dies, he comes back as a ghost, begging you to free him from his commitment. Sounds like a winner. He cannot marry her because he is dead, but her refusal would mean his damnation. So she could say, no, you're stuck. This reflects a popular British belief that the dead haunted their lovers if they took up with a new love without some sort of formal release. That's interesting. The unquiet grave expresses a belief even more widespread, found in various locations over Europe. Ghosts can stem from the excessive grief of the living, whose mourning interferes with the dead's peaceful rest. In many folk tales from around the world, the hero arranges for the burial of a dead man. Soon after, he gains a companion who aids him. In the end, the hero's companion reveals that he is in fact the dead man. Instances of this include the Italian fairy tale Fairbrow and the Swedish The Bird Grip. So there is a modern period in Western culture called the spiritualist movement. Now, to my knowledge, the spiritualist movement happened in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and there were a lot of people that were said to conduct things like seances. There was the spiritualist movement where these people believed to be psychics or mediums, whether they called themselves that or not, were said to channel or go into a trance-like state to communicate with these dead people, these ghosts. There were also said to have photograph evidence of some of these things that some were later debunked as like special effects of the day, where it was like double exposed film and things like that. There were very few, to my knowledge, that were ever deemed to be legitimate. So let's discuss. So in the spiritualist movement, it is a monotheistic belief system or religion. Now, I, for many years, called myself a spiritualist, and we can define that. We probably should, so let's do so. Okay, so the definition of a spiritualist is a person who believes that the spirits of the dead can communicate with living people. So I do believe that. So the philosophy is that an advocate of the doctrine that the spirit exists as a distinct from matter, or that the spirit is the only reality, relating to the belief that the spirit of the dead can communicate with living people. So a spiritualist is a person who believes in spiritualism, a religious movement that posts that disembodied spirits can communicate with the living, often through a medium. So that is my own personal thing. All right, so back to the topic at hand. So let's see. A spiritualist is a person whose belief system or religion is a belief in God, but with a distinguishing feature of belief that spirits of the dead residing in the spirit world can be contacted by mediums who can then provide information about the afterlife. Here we are. So I am of a spiritual belief system. I'm not necessarily religious, although I do believe in God and Jesus. I don't believe a whole lot of the accounts of things after that in the Bible. Some of it, yes, some of it, no. So it's a very gray area for me in my world, because I do communicate with deceased people, have most of my life. And so I know for a fact that it's real because I live with it every single day. So, spiritualism developed in the United States and reached its peak growth in membership from the 1840s to the 1920s, especially in English language countries. By 1897, it was said to have more than 8 million followers in the United States and Europe. 8 million. Okay, that's a lot of people. Mostly drawn from the middle and upper classes, while the corresponding movement in continental Europe and Latin America is known as Spiritism. So spiritualism, Spiritism, they're close. The religion flourished for half a century without canonical texts or formal organization, attaining cohesion by periodicals, tours by trance lecturers, camp meetings, and the missionary activities of accomplished mediums. Many prominent spiritualists were women. Most followers supported causes such as the abolition of slavery and women's suffrage. And by the late 1880s, credibility of the informal movement weakened due to accusations of fraud among mediums, and formal spiritualist organizations began to appear. Spiritualism is currently practiced primarily through various denominational spiritualist churches in the United States and United Kingdom. So some of it still exists today. Spiritism. Spiritism, or French spiritualism, is based on the 5 books of the Spiritist codification written by French educator, I don't even want to try and say his name, Revile is his last name. Let's see. So they were reporting seances in which he observed a series of phenomena that he attributed to spirits, communicating with intelligent spirits. His assumption of spirit communication was validated by many contemporaries, among them many scientists and philosophers who attended seances and studied the phenomena. His work was later extended by so many writers: Leon Dennis, Arthur Conan Doyle, Camille Flammarion, and others. Let's see. Spiritism has in many countries throughout the world, including Spain, the United States, Canada, Japan, Germany, France, England, Argentina, Portugal, and especially Brazil, which has the largest population and greatest number of followers. So, what does science think of this? I'm sure science thinks it's all garbage, right? Because they usually do. So, there were many different theories, many different doctors who had studied this. And in 1813, John Farrar, who wrote an essay towards a theory of apparitions in 1813, he argued that sightings of ghosts were the result of optical illusions, right? So he's trying to discount and disprove that people are actually seeing these apparitions or these ghosts. Later, the French physician Alexandre Jacques Breuer published one on hallucinations, or the rational history of apparitions, dreams, ecstasy, magnetism, and somnambulism, that's a hard word, in 1845. One in which he claimed that sightings of ghosts were the result of hallucinations. So science is always going to try and either prove or disprove things. And if they don't have any actual evidence that's tangible, that they can recreate in a lab, or that they can, test it over and over again and come up with the same result, they're going to say that it's debunked or that it's not factual, because that's how science works. Now, science was one of my best subjects in school, and I loved science, especially chemistry and things like that. It was one of my favorite subjects. But science is there to prove or disprove something, that it's real or that it works. And so it goes through a lot of tests, trials, and errors in order to create your outcome or your theory being proved or disproved. So these doctors were trying to basically figure out whether ghosts were real, right? There was so many different accounts all throughout the world that it's like, well, let's see what we find out. So David Turner, a retired physical chemist, suggested that ball lightning could cause inanimate objects to move erratically. Ball lightning is just that. It's literally a ball of energy, of electricity, and it's a pretty rare phenomena from what I understand. There's a picture here, and it literally shows what looks like a ball of light coming like through a window is what it looks like in the picture. So they were saying that they think ball lightning caused inanimate or unalive objects to move crazily or differently. Joe Nickell of the Committee for Skeptical Inquiry wrote that there was no credible scientific evidence that any location was inhabited by spirits of the dead. Limitations of human perception and ordinary physical explanations can account for ghost sightings. For example, air pressure changes in a home causing doors to slam. That happens in my house all the time. You have a window open, a door slams shut, right? It's not a ghost, it's just a draft, things like that. Humidity changes causing boards to creak, very plausible, especially in old homes with large wooden boards. Condensation in electrical connections causing intermittent behavior like lights flickering on or off, or lights from a passing car reflecting through a window at night. Those are all plausible. Those are easily explained away. But an innate tendency to recognize patterns in random perceptions is what some skeptics believe causes people to believe that they have seen ghosts. Reports of ghosts seen out of the corner of the eye, and I've had that happen so many times I've lost count, may be accounted for by the sensitivity of a human's peripheral vision, right? Seeing out of the sides of your eyes. According to Nickell, peripheral vision can easily mislead, especially late at night when the brain is tired and more likely to misinterpret sights and sounds. Nickell further states science cannot substantiate the existence of a life energy that could survive death without dissipating or function at all without a brain. Why would clothes survive, he asks. If ghosts glide, then why do people claim to hear them with heavy footfalls or heavy footsteps? Nickell says that ghosts act the same way as dreams, memories, and imaginings, because they too are mental creations. They are evidence not of another world, but of this real and natural one. So he goes on to disprove, saying, well, why would a ghost need clothing? Well, why would they have heavy footsteps if they're energy, right? Like they're not physical, so how would they do all those things? So good food for thought, but if you've seen a full-bodied apparition and you've seen those things, it's a little bit different. So I don't discount a lot of the personal experiences that people have had with ghosts, because let's say you're fully alert, fully aware, you're not sleepy, you're not tired, and more than one person saw it. Are they all hallucinating? Probably unlikely, right? So I tend to believe people when it's like, yeah, no, like 3 or 4 of us saw the same thing. We all heard the same thing. Probably more likely that it's a real haunting. All right, so let's see. So there's lots and lots of different accounts of ghosts and things like that. So let's talk for just a moment about the religion, because we know spiritualism is a type of religion. So this one has to do with Judaism. All right, so they do mention one called a dubuque, and I've seen other ghost hunters come across what they claim is a dubuque box, which is basically a box that contains a dark entity, a demon in it, and it's usually sealed with wax on all of its sides. And it's said that you don't want to ever open it because you're allowing that demon or dubuque to come out and potentially inhabit something else or someone else, right? Possessions and things like that. So that is one that is a belief in Judaism. So the Hebrew Bible contains several references to ghosts of some kind, which are in a few places akin to shades of classical mythology, but mostly describing mediums in connection with necromancy and spirit consulting, which are grouped with witchcraft and other forms of divination under the category of forbidden occult activities, right? The Bible also says you shouldn't consult psychics or mediums or oracles, prophets. And so me personally, being somebody that can channel and can contact the other side, I always found that very disheartening. It's like, why would God give me this gift if I wasn't supposed to use it? Why would I have that? That would be like I'm this avid runner and I'm supposed to compete marathons because I can run really, really fast. I can't, by the way. But why would I have that natural ability if it wasn't supposed to be used? And so that's always been something that's been really hard for me, because I believe my gifts do come from God. I channel often about really positive things, and I don't typically connect to really dark, negative energy. So I know that this comes from God. So it talks about the witch of Endor again and King Saul, about how they were conducting a seance to summon the dead prophet Samuel. So there were positive prophets in the Bible, right? And in Jewish text as well, talking about these different prophets. Why were some good and some not? I have questions. Okay, so I'm not going to get too much into that, but there are definitely some other folklore associated with Jewish mythology, and they do describe dubuques. So let's see. It says that a dubuque is a malicious, possessing spirit believed to be the dislocated soul of a dead person. It supposedly leaves the host body once it has accomplished its goal, sometimes after being exorcised. So we think of it as like a demon or a poltergeist, possessive sort of energy going through, an unclean spirit, as it says. Christianity, we also have different like disciples of Jesus that were persuaded. Let's see, it says in the New Testament, Jesus has to persuade the disciples that he is not a ghost following his resurrection in Luke 24:37 through 39. Some versions of the Bible, such as the King James Version, use the term spirit. Similarly, Jesus' followers at first believe he is a ghost or a spirit when they see him walking on water. Human beings can't do those things, right? So we look at him as otherworld entities, right? That's not normal. That's not human. Because if a human being tried to go walk on water, they'd fall in, right? There's no possibility that they could do that. So some Christian denominations, such as the Roman Catholic Church, consider ghosts as beings who, while tied to earth, no longer live on the material plane and linger in an intermediate state, also known as purgatory, before continuing their journey to heaven. On occasion, God would allow the souls in this state to return to earth to warn the living of the need for repentance. Christians are taught that it is sinful to attempt to conjure or control spirits in accordance with Deuteronomy. Some ghosts are actually said to be demons in disguise, who the church teaches in accordance with Timothy that they come to deceive people and draw them away from God into bondage. So that is the polar opposite of what I do with my gift. my whole goal is to help people, give them some sort of closure, knowledge, or healing information so they can grow and become their best version of themselves. So I would say that I disagree with how that is worded. All right, so let's see. As a result, attempts to contact the dead may lead to unwanted contact with a demon or an unclean spirit, as was said to occur in the case with Robbie Manaheim, a 14-year-old Maryland boy. The Seventh-day Adventist view is that a soul is not equivalent to a spirit or ghost, depending on the Bible version used, and that save for the Holy Spirit, all spirits or ghosts are demons in disguise. Furthermore, they teach that in accordance with Genesis and Ecclesiastes, that there are only two components of a soul, neither of which survives death, with each returning to its respective source. So there's a ton of different religions that believe very different things, but the majority of them are in agreement that we don't contact the dead. So they demonize mediums, they demonize people who can contact them, and there's lots of frauds out there. So I want to preface by saying not everybody who claims to be a medium actually is. So do your homework and be cautious with that. All right, Islam is another one. Let's see. So they talk about the spirit, the soul, a term used for ghosts. The souls of these deceased dwell in Barzakh. I'm probably saying that wrong. There is a barrier in the Quran in Islamic tradition that refers to an entire intermediary world between the living and the afterlife. The world, especially cemeteries, are perforated with several gateways to the other world, or this Barzakh. In rare occasions, the dead can appear to the living. Pure souls, such as the souls of saints, are commonly addressed as, while impure souls seeking for revenge are often addressed as Arfat. I don't know how to say that. In an inappropriate burial can also cause a soul to stay in this world of purgatory, whereupon roaming the earth as a ghost. Other souls are cursed by God to roam the earth restlessly. And since the just souls remain close to their tomb, some people try to communicate with them in order to gain hidden knowledge. Contact with the dead is not the same as contact with a jinn. Not this jinn, a jinn as in a spirit or a ghost, who alike could provide knowledge concealed from living humans. Many encounters with ghosts are related to dreams supposed to occur in the realm of symbols. All right, so we have several world religions mentioned. Hinduism is another one. Let's see, Buddhism, African lore, European folklore. So a million different places all around the world. South and Southeastern Asia, North India, East India, Thailand, Tibet, Austro-Indonesia, East and Central Asia, China, Japan, Americas, Mexico. So they show a picture of the Day of the Dead. Let's see. So let's talk about that for just a second. There is extensive and varied belief in ghosts in Mexican culture. The modern state of Mexico, before the Spanish conquest, was inhabited by diverse peoples such as the Maya and Aztecs. Their beliefs have survived and evolved, combined with the beliefs of the Spanish colonists. The Day of the Dead incorporates pre-Columbian beliefs with Christian elements. Mexican literature and films include many stories of ghosts interacting with the living. So it's almost like certain cultures aren't near as afraid of it and other cultures are terrified of it, which I find kind of interesting. Let's see. So according to the Gallup Poll News Service, belief in haunted houses, ghosts, communication with the dead, and witches had an especially steep increase over the 1990s. A 2005 Gallup poll found that about 32% of Americans believe in ghosts. All right, let's see what. So ghosts are depicted in the arts, in movies and books, folk tales, ghost stories. What comes to mind is people sitting around a campfire with the flashlight, right? And telling their spooky stories just in time to get a jump scare. Let's see, prophets, morality tales, Homer's Odyssey, the underworld. Okay, tons and tons of stuff. It was romanticized in the Renaissance period, in the Victorian and Edwardian period. Ghosts were definitely something that writers wrote about a lot. Let's see, tons and tons of different books that had to do with ghosts. A Christmas Carol, that was the movie with Ebenezer Scrooge. That was a movie that depicted 3 different ghosts in which they were helping Scrooge to see the error of his ways by a ghost of his former colleague, Jacob Marley, and the ghosts of Christmas past and Christmas present and Christmas yet to come. So we have tons of different accounts of these things, some true, some false. We have the modern era in 1920 to 1970, where we started to see parapsychologists and professional ghost hunters that were very active, published accounts of their experiences, true ghost stories, the most haunted house in England, the Underwood's ghost of Borley. Let's see, what else is notable? Children's ghosts, such as Casper the Friendly Ghost, created in the 1930s. I didn't realize it was that old. I used to love Casper. It was one of my favorite ones. Animated cartoons and eventually feature films. Okay, so we also have like different accounts of haunted houses, movies that were different things to do with ghosts and hauntings, and then we have the 1970s to present day. So the 1970s saw screen depictions of ghosts diverge into distinct genres of the romance and horror side. A common theme in the romantic genre from this period is the ghost as a benign guide or messenger, often with unfinished business, such as 1989's film Field of Dreams, great movie, and the 1990 film Ghost with Patrick Swayze, another great movie, and in 1993 comedy Heart and Souls. In the horror genre in the 1980s, The Fog and A Nightmare on Elm Street, we did a Freddy Krueger one. Check that out. We did a ghost hunt about the real Freddy Krueger, and we also were talking about him and some other stuff. It is a series of films from the 1980s and 90s that are notable examples of the trend for the merging of ghost stories with scenes of physical violence. And we don't roll with those, so we don't do the whole violence stuff over here. There were also films like The Ghostbusters, when ghost hunting became a hobby for many who formed ghost hunting societies to explore reportedly haunted places. The ghost hunting theme has been featured in reality TV shows such as Ghost Adventures, Ghost Hunters International, Ghost Lab, Most Haunted, and A Haunting. It is also represented in children's television by such programs as The Ghost Hunter and Ghost Trackers. Ghost hunting also gave rise to multiple guidebooks to haunted locations and ghost hunting how-to manuals. In the 1990s, we saw a return to classic Gothic ghosts whose dangers were more psychological than physical. Examples of films from this period include 1990's The Sixth Sense and the others. I loved The Sixth Sense. I loved that you didn't know that Bruce Willis's character was actually a ghost until much later in the film. The child, I can't remember the actor's name of the child, but he was a medium and he didn't know, Haley Joel Osment, that's the kid's name. He didn't know he could see dead people. So he's telling his therapist, because he was, if I remember right, he was in the car with one of his parents. I think it was his mom. And he's telling her very nonchalantly, there's a person standing outside my window, right? And it's looking at him. Oh, okay, the mom can't see him. So he goes on and he tells her, yeah, he was in a bad accident. He got really hurt. I don't think he's alive anymore. And the mom's like, what? What are you talking about? You know, because she can't see it. So he sees all these entities, these ghosts that have died, and they come to him because he's the medium. He's like a lighthouse and they see him through the dark. So that's kind of how it works for mediums. So What do you think? Do you think ghosts are real? This was a really long episode. I hope you guys hung out till the end. If you did, drop me a comment. I would love to hear from you. So we are going to continue our folklore series up until Halloween. And after that, we will resume some other episodes going forward for the podcast. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you learned something. What was your favorite part about this whole ghostly episode? Hope to hear from you. Have a wonderful rest of your week.